Well, everybody, wait a minute. Well, everybody, wait a minute. Well, everybody, wait a minute. Sunshine, sunshine. Well, everybody, wait a minute. Yeah, but everybody, wait a minute. Yeah, keep me right there. Everybody, wait a minute. Well, everybody, wait a minute. I mix what I like, what I like, what I like, what I like, what I like. Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to I Mix What I Like. Again, I'm Jared Ball, happy to be your host. Please do all the things on your way in. Good to see you. Good to be back. Looking forward to this upcoming discussion. So please do prepare yourself for that. Already in the show description are the links to part one of this discussion, to Professor Allen's bio and full body of work, and to the book that we're going to be talking about, the conclusion of Fintech Dystopia. So please do, again, if you haven't already, add this to your reading list. It's an absolute must include. And yes, if you are so inclined and don't have anything to do, Sunday the 28th, starting at 5 p.m. Eastern for patrons, including free membership. There's no money required. Sign up over there. I'll put the link in the show description to that as well. Or the Patreon's already there, so you can go and sign up and come hang out. And yes, we are live. So, but because we're catching Professor Allen after and or in between classes, we're definitely catching me between classes. Let me go ahead and get to the conversation and welcome back once again Professor Hilary Allen, who, among many other things, is a professor of law at American University, where she teaches courses on banking law, securities regulation, and business associations. Professor Allen, thank you very much for coming back. It's good to see you again. Welcome. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon. Thank you. And thank you for accommodating me. I did just teach business associations. So.
Yeah. Right on. Do you talk about your how much do you blend your personal and other work in your classes? Do you talk about your book and this work in this class or in your classes?
I do. It's sort of a tough line to walk, right?
Mhm.
Like, I'm not teaching, a course on fintech regulation or the political economy of Silicon Valley. But one of the things I feel about the book is that it touches on so many aspects of our lives. So it does pop up here and there, but I don't want to make it all about me.
Okay, right on. Well, true, not all about you, but the work is you're right. I don't know anything about the curriculum for a business, yeah, for those courses. So I for so yeah, but it
But
just
let
I'm fascinated by it, and it overlaps. It does overlap with so much. I'm actually going to be working it into my sociology of mass communication course this semester, just in terms of something I do want to ask you about at some point, because
Okay.
where you talk about narrative and the importance of
Uh,
narrative to all of this, which is very important to me. So, but
well, thank you. That's an honor. Yeah, I would just say so my business associations class is
business associates, yeah.
it's for the bar exam, right? So there is stuff
Mm,
that, I am so fascinated about all of this, but I want to make sure that I don't get so distracted by what I'm fascinated in that I don't give
right,
them what they need to pass the bar.
right. Yeah, no doubt. I don't have any like I don't have that kind of immediate pressing need, so I can be a little more flexible and I'm definitely working this in, especially because having finished the book now. Well, I have a lot of questions, just like last time. I have a lot of things that I want to
Yeah.
ask and raise, and then if we have time, we can check the chat for the undefeated chat for any comments that they or questions that they might have. I do have sort of a broad question about what is techno-solutionism, and then maybe we could start with what that is, and then have you tell us about how the book plays out, and maybe just and then we'll go from there. Just yeah,
Yeah.
and then but then I have some questions that'll walk us through the rest of the book for sure. But and folks, please do check the first conversation for the first half of this discussion. Um,
Yeah.
for the whole thing. Yeah. Sorry. Go ahead. Yeah.
No, no, that's all right. No, no. So yeah, no, I mean, so the first half of the conversation we had was sort of examples of techno-solutionism. But what I
Mhm.
do in the second half is just sort of extrapolate from those examples to the bigger problems with techno-solutionism. So I appreciate you asking me to start out by defining what I mean with that. What I mean is essentially techno-solutionism is a way of looking at the world where you think that everything has a technological solution, right? And it has a lot of negative consequences. It means you sort of flatten the world and its problems into things that are easily solved by technology, and you distract from or sometimes exacerbate the aspects of problems that don't lend themselves neatly to these technological solutions. When you look at the world as a series of technology puzzles to be solved, you put a lot of power in the hands of the technologists themselves. And we often think of those people as neutral or just, mechanical, but they couldn't be further from the truth. And that's something I get into a lot in the latter half of the book, sort of what you're buying when you buy Silicon Valley. So when you buy into their solutions, there's a lot of values that are encoded in that that maybe you don't like. And, I think what we really need is a world where being against techno-solutionism, I want to be clear, is not being against technology. There's a lot of very good, useful technology. It's just when you see the world as nothing but a series of technological puzzles, you sort of you shunt democratic solutions to problems out of the way. You shunt different kinds of expertise that isn't technological out of the way, and my view is that everything ends up worse as a result.
Oh, and I want to say you basically, to me, you somewhat add to the mountain of proof this does not have a good end. So sort of a spoiler alert, just for those. But one of the things that I thought was really fascinating was that what initially drew me to reach out to you, however many months ago, for our very first conversation was your what I'd seen of your argument around Bitcoin and cryptocurrency. But a lot of your book felt like, at least, ends up talking about artificial intelligence, AI, and this has been um, perfectly timed for me, at least, because I've been engaging more the work of someone else like Dwayne Monroe, for instance, Professor Monroe, who makes a very similar argument that I hear you making. One, that uh, AI isn't what it's being cracked up to be, and a lot of the messaging is really about those who have invested trying to recoup the profit that they were hoping to get from something that really isn't being adopted or adapted to the extent that they would like, and doesn't really have the kind of use value that they promise. Um, but 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 if you could talk about how both AI and crypto overlap
Yeah.
in your conversation about what the techno-solutionists are arguing, and how, from what I'm understanding, so much of the argument and narrative around why we should get into both of them is very similar and has similarly nothing underneath, and is being promoted by basically the same collective of Silicon Valley. And I was a fan of that series, by the way, you talk about, and recommend people even rewatch it. And I think I will now after reading your book. So I did mean to encourage people to that, if they haven't already. That Sorry, I didn't mean. Rarely do I encourage people to engage popular media to get real life, whatever. But at the same time, I uh, agreed with your suggestion when you mentioned it in your book. And then I even emailed you and suggested to you to see this new film called Mountainhead,
Yeah.
which I happened to see the other day, and seems to be written by people who read your work and wanted to make a sort of a disturbing parody based on what you've. But anyway, sorry about all that. AI and crypto, the overlap in the techno-solutionist underpinnings.
Well, I mean, I think it all ties together the way you've put it together. I mean, I think the greatest sleight of hand I think that has ever been achieved by Silicon Valley is their catchphrase that they do things to make the world a better place, right? There was this sort of active branding exercise to distinguish themselves from Wall Street and be about, like, we're making money, yes, but we're making money for good, and we're not just thinking about short-term profits and the bottom line. And I think the reality is that Silicon Valley is indeed thinking about short-term profits and the bottom line, and that is its guiding logic. And I think we've had sort of a mask-off moment for a little while now about that, but there's still this persistent thought that, like, well, technological progress is, something that, like, a rising tide lifts all boats. I've been calling it trickle down innovation, because just like trickle down economics was, supposed to make things better for everyone, their innovation is supposed to trickle down benefits for everybody, and it's just as facetious, like that whole logic. So, understanding that it is a for-profit industry that is just there for short-term profits. I'm not saying that that's, it shouldn't be that. I think there's a place for regulation to rein that in, but there's nothing. I mean, my concern is that it has created a false narrative about what its goals are, and that narrative has been enormously helpful for it in basically creating all kinds of destructive business models that we subsidize. And I'm happy to get into that. And but we just look the other way, because surely this technological progress will help everybody. And as you mentioned, I sort of came to my tech skepticism through crypto, and I was actually really hesitant to start being critical of AI, you know, because I was so critical of of crypto and Bitcoin, and I just didn't want to become someone who had a knee-jerk reaction to every technology, thinking that, oh, this also is driven by the same short-term profit incentives, and therefore, we should be skeptical of it. And so I was really very cautious on my journey with learning about AI. And I should just say, AI is a marketing term. There have been tools that get branded as AI that are quite useful, that have been around for decades, and when I'm talking about my AI skepticism, what I'm really honed in on is these generative AI, products like ChatGPT and things like that. And that's really that's the current gold rush, if you will. And so I was looking at that and I was thinking, am I the problem? Do I just fail to see what's so great here? Am I just so skeptical because I've seen what they did with crypto and I'm worried they're doing the same thing? So I spent a long time coming to my conclusion on this. And my conclusion is it's the same people doing the same thing as crypto. So, Andreessen Horowitz built the crypto industry. Andreessen Horowitz has been one of the main sort of leaders in this generative AI space. They're not the only ones, obviously, but they all hang out together. Sam Altman from OpenAI, started OpenAI with Elon Musk. Andreessen Horowitz helped Elon Musk buy out Twitter and turn it into X. It's just, they're all very connected. And so I think it's fair to say that we should look for patterns, I guess, in what they do. And, the more I've learned about generative AI, the more I see that it is something that has been propped up by a decade plus of very easy money coming from the low interest rate environment following 2008. And with that kind of money, you don't actually have to show that your business can do anything. You can subsidize the hell out of it. You can lobby for it. You can buy hype for it in the media. And you can make a lot of money that way, even if the product doesn't do what you says it does. And that is true of crypto. And it is also true of generative AI. It is not intelligent in any way, shape, or form. It is a word predictor machine based on probabilities. We talk about hallucinations like they're mistakes, but in fact, that's sort of how the technology works, because it's just probabilistically what are the next set of words. And, all the attempts to get rid of those, mistakes have hit against a wall, because that is what it is. What we're seeing, in fact, is a lot of human involvement, actual, like, low paid humans, of course, being injected back into the process to try and sort of make it more accurate. But this technology, I think, is just, it's not what it cracked up to me. And sorry, that was a very long answer, but it took me, I was so cautious about wanting to think that this was just part of the same playbook as crypto. And now I kind of think it's absolutely part of the same playbook as crypto. It's not quite so useless as a blockchain technology. I mean, it does do things. It doesn't do everything it claims to do. It does the things that it does do, it does at enormous costs to the environment, to the workers, who, both those who are used in making it and those who are being fired because their boss wanted to fire them anyway, and this is a great pretext. So there's a lot of harms that come with it. It does do some things. I don't want to sort of negate that, but it is that same techno-solutionist attitude of, we'll just make up this great story about how this technology will solve the problem. It'll cause a lot of harms along the way, may not actually solve the problem, but no one will dare push back because we're the technologists and they're afraid of looking stupid.
Well, but part of what, again, has me so appreciative of your work here is that, sort of to the point you're just making, it isn't that there's no value or nothing that could be derived from even, from blockchain or artificial intelligence. It's that so much of the narrative around it is that it's going to solve all of the world's problems, all of the inequality, all of the historical wrongs, but it's going to do it in a way, but what you importantly point to in talking about some of the figures behind all of this, or supporting, or promoting all of this, is that they want something themselves more for the world than that what they're sharing with us. And I don't feel like a lot of us would agree with it. So that the world, because again, when they're saying that the solution that they're saying that their technology is going to bring is not, I think, what they hope we think of a solution. What we think of about what is a solution. So many of us would think of something like, some would be, as it's been promoted certainly to Black and Brown communities, this is going to solve racial, historical, and inequality. To other communities, this is going to be some sort of great advancement in both technology, investment opportunity, something that's going to help business. But when you talk about it, and if people follow beyond even what you've talked about here, uh, um, the Peter Thiels of the world, the Elon Musk's, the Andreessen and Horowitzes of the world, they have a vision of a future that is not involving much democracy, doesn't involve much redistribution, it doesn't involve much support for workers' rights or consumer protections, or democracy, as many people have been popularly understood, been encouraged to understand the concept. So, so could you talk a little bit about what you think or have seen or learned in your research and are conveying in your book here about the world that they would like to create, and the solution that they would like to
Yeah.
provide for us?
Yeah, what
That
what you're
final
buying.
solution.
Well, I mean, what you're buying when you're buying Silicon Valley is a world that I very much wouldn't want to live in. And I say that as a reasonably privileged white woman, and I absolutely would not want to live in that world if I were less privileged than I am, because this is a world of essentially tech CEO dictatorship, is how they see the ideal world, right? It's this techno-solutionism taken to the extreme, where and there's so much discussion in these circles about high IQ and how we can use things to make things more IQ. And I mean, that's tied into the whole AI conversation as well. I mean, what do we even mean by intelligence? Well, the whole concept of intelligence is racially constructed, and there's a very specific vision of what they think is merit and valuable. And it is, honestly, to my mind, it's it's so pathetically funny, that they think that they are the uber humans. I mean, and that's why I spend a lot of time in the book talking about how these people just were in the right place at the right time. I'm not saying they're dumb. They're probably smart on some things, dumb on others. I'm not saying they're lazy. They're probably hard workers on some things, that other things they don't care about.
Especially on all the substances they allegedly
Well, yeah,
spend time
there's
with. Yeah.
definitely apparently a whole lot of ketamine going on. But what makes them special is that they were in the right place at the right time, typically the right colleges at the right time, right? So you got Mark Zuckerberg, who happened to be an Ivy League student at the time that social networks were taking off in the dorms of Ivy League colleges. You've got Mark Andreessen, who happened to be a student at the University of Illinois at the time where they had a government contract, government funded grant, sorry, to develop sort of the first internet browser. And he took that know-how and launched a for-profit one, and that's how he had made his money. You've got the PayPal mafia. These are the people who started with with Peter Thiel. So it's Elon Musk, it's David Sachs, who's now in the White House as the AI and crypto czar, amongst other people. They were all friends with Peter Thiel from Stanford, right? They all worked, well, not Musk, but a lot of the members of the PayPal mafia, Sachs for sure. They were all friends, at Stanford, and Peter Thiel managed to sort of bump into a guy in a nearly empty lecture hall in Stanford, and that's where they got how he found the person who would help him, who built the technology essentially for PayPal. And PayPal was just one of so many different sort of tech startups at the time, all of which were trying to do, by the way, what crypto wants to do, which is disrupt traditional finance and get money out from the control of the government and the central banks and whatever. They were all trying to do it, including PayPal. PayPal stumbled into a use case with eBay. It's there's just so much luck in all of this. And so actually a lot of the book, not a lot, but parts of the book, I talk about sort of the behavioral psychology about all of this, about how as humans we want to tell stories about how these are great men of history who are smarter and better than the rest of us, and that we assume therefore that everything else that they talk about they must be brilliant at as well. And I talk about, just the role of statistics and luck in all of this. And, one of the things I thought was so interesting, there's a book by, I think it's David Frank, and it's called Success and Luck, The Myth of the Meritocracy. And he talks about how luck is just so critically important in the life story of anyone who's been inordinately successful. And one of the things he talks about is research on people who don't recognize that they have been lucky are generally more miserable. They also don't like to pay it forward. They don't like to pay taxes. And then they're miserable. So these people who are high on their own sort of hagiography, and not only do they not want to pay taxes because they think there's something special about them and they shouldn't have to give back to society, but they also are probably going to be searching for something to fill the hole, because if they don't have that gratitude for the luck that they've had along the way. And then we all end up, given how much money and power they have, stuck with whatever their pet projects are to fill the hole. And I get into these, what's being called the TESCREAL bundle of weird things that people in Silicon Valley believe in, that has definitely a eugenics flavor to it. And we become essentially sort of co-opted into that because these are the people who are building the solutions for everything in our society.
And as you point out, I mean, you do trace various marginalized and oppressed communities and their relationship to this political economy, at least briefly. And but part of what I did find compelling about your argument, you touched on here just a little bit, was that for all the exclusion of women, of Black people, of whomever else, of the world's majority, even elite white men are wildly excluded from the inside club, because basically all of this is happening between Harvard and Stanford graduates. It's like it's a very small group of people who are at this level, or playing at this level of the game, and yet spinning these narratives and stories about how everybody's going to benefit from it. And just basically, and as you even point out, I mean, it happened to me in several of the debates I had. In fact, I'm going to use that to segue to ask you about something you talk about, that so many of the debates that I was having these last couple of years around this, and that I'll be engaging again later this month at the Black blockchain conference at Howard University, which is going to be my annual throwing myself into the lion's den, so to speak. But so much of their argument is, Jared, you just don't get it. Like, you don't understand the numbers and the technology. And if you understood everything, and if you understood what blockchain really did and how it worked, if you understood crypto and how it's really going to work, you wouldn't be making these arguments. And I keep saying, well, I'm just looking at the narrative and the outcomes keep ending up, the narratives all seem the same, to your point, and then the outcomes also seem the same, that we end up with a handful of people with all the wealth. And but one of the arguments that came up also in that debate was was one attendant to that, was to the claim that I don't understand, was that, Jared, you don't even understand that Bitcoin, you don't understand how these items are being classified. So, Jared, you keep wanting to call it a currency, and it's not a currency; it's a token. And initially, I didn't get it. It took me some time to read up and catch up to why they were making that argument. Could you talk a little bit about that point and anything else associated with that? Why is it so important to some that it be classified as a token and not a currency, even though part of the argument was that you're going to be able to use it to supplant the dollar, which is always like, why do you keep telling me that if you also want to tell me it's not currency, it's a token? But then and then when I read your book, I was like, okay, now I'm even, it's even more clear. But yeah, please, if you would say something about that.
Yeah, so I mean, on the crypto stuff, the semantics mattered not because you needed to understand the technology. And to be clear, and this is one of my pet peeves, there's plenty of people in the crypto industry who disagree over terminology, right? So this is a classic tactic. You say one misdescribed thing wrong and you're entirely discredited, and everything you have to say is discredited. But in fact, even amongst the people who are for it, there is disagreement on this stuff. So it is impossible to make everybody happy in your terminology. But the reason why it matters in crypto is legal. So it's not about the technology, it's about the arguments that are made about legal classification. And that has mattered because basically the crypto industry, so it's something you said earlier, I'm gonna quibble with a little bit. You said that I wasn't saying that blockchain is totally useless. I actually am saying blockchain is totally useless. I'm not saying that Gen AI is totally useless, but
Right.
okay, if we're going to be pedantic about terms, I am saying that public permissionless blockchain technology is completely useless. There are other types of databases that are sometimes referred to as blockchains that have uses. So I'm not. So I too get in trouble for not using the perfectly precise terminology. But I do think that public permissionless blockchain is useless. And there was actually a letter signed by more than 1,500 independent technologists who basically said exactly that. Right. So it's not just Hilary, the law professor, saying this. This is many people who work in tech, who don't work for the industry, have come to that conclusion. And so there's two sort of broad ways I want to go with your question. I mean, so one is about the actual sort of the legal aspect of this, which is that the technology has never provided the basis for the profitability of the crypto industry because blockchains effectively suck. Where the profitability has come from is from exploiting legal differences, playing on an unlevel legal playing field. So, if you can convince people that your crypto asset isn't a security, then you don't have to comply with the securities laws, and those can be expensive to comply with. They exist for a good reason, for investor protection, but they can be expensive to comply with. And actually, they sort of weed out people making up financial assets out of thin air with nothing behind them. And I might suggest that would be a good thing to weed out. But anyway, so the reason why you get this sort of such fervent debates about the terminology in crypto was it came down to whether something was a security or not and how it was regulated. And like a couple of years back, you'd find Twitter filled with crypto bros sort of opining on arcane securities regulation cases and whatever, and it was quite the scene. But the broader issue I want to bring up is that this isn't just about legal classification, although it's often important for that. And that is that just like the weaponization of tech rhetoric, the discrediting any concern, qualm, as you say, about the impact. You look at the impact, you say, okay, I might not understand how the technology works, but I can see what's happening on the ground and I don't like it. To be able to just sort of discredit that entirely by saying, aha, you don't know the intricacies of the technology and therefore you have nothing of value to say to this. That is another really pernicious aspect of techno-solutionism. It is very much a weapon that Silicon Valley uses regularly. One recent book that I came out that I really like is Jason Sadowski's The Mechanic and the Luddite. And he talks about sort of the need for a big tent because we need both kinds of criticism. We need the people, the independent technologists, like I mentioned, who weighed in on how bad blockchain technology is. We need the people who are, the independent data scientists who are saying, like, yeah, no, you're never going to solve the hallucination problem, right? We need those people who can actually push back on the tech narratives, but they're not the only or the most important skeptics. They are a critically valuable contingent of skeptics. Unfortunately, it's a group that is often, limited in size because Silicon Valley has very aggressively funded a lot of academic programs relating to technology, and with that funding, it makes independent experts nervous about being critical of the technology. But with that said, there are still lots of independent experts out there on the tech to weigh in. We need them, but we also very much need the people asking the questions that you just talked about. How is this used? How are people experiencing it? What impact is it having on the ground? Like an analogy I sometimes draw is like, if you were worried about the fentanyl problem, you wouldn't base all your recommendations on the recommendations of a chemist who studied the breakdown of fentanyl, right? Because that's not even half the story. And when we say that the only people who get to weigh in are the equivalent chemists, that's just a ridiculous way of dealing with this. But yet, that is how so much of the debate progresses, and it's used actively to discredit criticism that comes from very informed places, but informed by places other than the technology.
Yeah, and especially when we're not clear on what those chemists have envisioned for the world that they want to now comment on every
Yeah,
aspect of.
for sure.
Um, all right, so this is going to be clumsy, I admit it, but I just didn't have time to do all the homework on this other issue. But you end up talking a little bit about Mark Cuban and what was his election analysis of this most past election, and why he argues the Democrats lost. I definitely want to talk about that. But have you, by any chance, at all been following this scandal with Steve Ballmer and Kawhi Leonard in the NBA
Yeah.
and
I'm
and
real bad at sports. You're gonna have to fill
but
me in.
so I no longer, this is a totally irrelevant, but I don't watch professional sport. I really don't watch many of these sports anymore at all. So it's not so much a sports story as it's a story of uh, uh, fraudulent ways to pay players that circumvent the salary cap and allow, you know so to get this very popular player, Ballmer allegedly had somewhere along, and this is the part where I'm not clear on the homework, but I did happen to catch this back and forth with Mark Cuban, who has a history with Ballmer, both as as on the same team and competing in their business work, and of course competing that he's not as rich as Ballmer. So there's always that, to be, you know. But Cuban was having this conversation with Pablo Torre, a popular sports journalist who broke the story about that I'm clumsily trying to summarize here about this funny money deal. And I happened to watch this as I was also reading and both listening to your book. And when you so it's sort of in between, and it seemed to overlap because a lot of, as you said, you talked a little bit about the behavioral psychology and all of this, and part of what the argument was between Cuban and Torre the journalist was Pablo Torre the journalist was that uh Cuban was, without knowing, defending Ballmer, a fellow billionaire, elite business person, an investor, as to your point, who's supposed to be this, that you talk about, this genius investor who, because he made all this money, can't be wrong and make any mistakes anywhere else in life. But that Cuban was saying there's no way he could have possibly known, because his empire is so big, and this deal really only reflected a tiny component of his overall financial empire, and he would not have been involved in the detail, in the weeds of this particular deal, and would not have understood what was happening, and would not have understood how he was getting conned. And it did make me think a little bit about what you were saying in your book about these billionaires, and how much they're paying attention to everything. And at some point, and I couldn't catch exactly the numbers, but at some point you do talk about, they're really trying to, you said something about they're more worried about missing the big win than they are about making a lot of silly mistakes along the way that meanwhile could be damaging to the rest of us and to the planet. But they're willing to take these losses. So you didn't see it, so it doesn't matter. So I went this long way around to really get to this point that I did want you to talk about, how these techno-solutionists are approaching these ideas, or these claimed solutions technologically to our world, and then how they're using our world to shape the world that they really want without telling us. So, and that's where, if you can work in what Cuban was saying about the failure of the Democrats in this election. Anyway, as I said, it was going to be clumsier than normal, but that
I
was,
got you.
I couldn't help the overlap. But yeah, please, yeah.
Yeah, no, I mean, what's funny, I mean, when you talk about the way you were describing the Ballmer situation, it actually reminds me more of my day job teaching banking law, this concept of too big to manage, right? At a certain point, you get like, how big is too big? If it's too big for you to oversee it, maybe that's too big. But I think the point you want to hone in on is really the sort of the perverse incentives that we get from the way we fund innovation. And so, we delegate so much of our, and increasingly, I mean, more so than ever. Like, so let me take a step back. So much of our scientific research and technological research and development has always happened in the public sector. It doesn't get as much, play, but like, the iPhone, all the technology was developed in academic settings or government settings, and then you sort of have at the end, Steve Jobs did a miraculous job of packaging it into something that everybody wanted, but the internet was invented by the defense department, right? So I think we sort of misunderstand how much research and development comes from the public sector, and we may actually start to realize now that a lot of that is being canceled under the current administration. But for now, we're still very dependent on the output of the public sector. But the narrative is that it's Silicon Valley and the venture capitalists who are the innovators, and they deny that narrative of innovation to the government because it doesn't serve their purposes, right? They want to be the special little boys who get all the special treatment, and so they do get an awful lot of special treatment. Things ranging from things like limited liability, which we're so used to in the corporate context that we don't even think about it. We think about it like it's a law of nature, but it's actually only been around for a couple hundred years, and it's a gift from the state, the ability to have limited liability. And for those who aren't familiar with it, limited liability is something that attaches to corporations, to limited liability companies, some other types of business entities. And what it means is the most you can lose is the most you invested. So these venture capital funds structure their funds as limited partnerships, which means that the most that they can lose in a particular investment is the most they invested. So to your point about, if the things they invest in cause really horrible problems for the world, they don't care so much. because they have limited liability. And that's a gift. That's a policy choice to encourage entrepreneurship. And I just think we should sort of recognize that that's one of the many gifts that they're getting. They have, the venture capital industry has lobbied very, very hard over the years to retain special treatment for capital gains taxation so that they pay less tax than you would on traditional income. They have also lobbied really hard for rules that allow pensions to invest in venture capital. So, pensions are supposed to be invested in pretty stable investments. We're talking about people's retirement savings here. But they lobbied really hard, the VC industry in the late 70s and early 80s, to get those laws changed so that pension, retirement funds could go into venture capital. We're seeing that happen in real time now, where there's there's pushes for retirement fundings to be invested in crypto, for 401k plans to be able to invest in like VC, all of which is much riskier than what we would traditionally think of as sort of a appropriate retirement asset for someone who doesn't have a lot of scope for losses. So all of this is to say that there's been a lot of public support and subsidies for the venture capital industry, and then another big one, which wasn't sort of intentionally directed at the venture capital industry, but they were a huge beneficiary of it, and I alluded to it before, is interest rate policy. So, following the financial crisis of 2008, we have rock bottom interest rates, until about 2015, and then they start to creep up again, and then the pandemic hits in 2020, and again, rates go rock bottom. People who are looking for a high return, and during that period look for riskier investments. Money flowed into venture capital, particularly in sort of 2020 and 2021, in amounts that were unprecedented, and so all of this really set up an industry that has so many subsidies that it doesn't actually have to be that innovative, right? They can just pick a thing, then they can lobby to make that a thing. They can subsidize to make that a thing. Like they can sort of offset the costs. Like the classic example here is Uber, right? They subsidized it, got everybody used to using it, and then the prices went up. That's actually, to be clear, the playbook with generative AI as well. Right now, it is entirely subsidized. The industry loses money every time you use one of their products. No one knows what it's going to look like when they actually try to start charging the actual price for it. But the hope is to get people hooked so that when the time comes to turn the screws, people will be willing to pay it. I think and this is a little off topic, but I think part of the palpable desperation you see around generative AI right now, like this desire to stick it into absolutely everything so you can't avoid it, this desire by employers to force their employees to use it, even if they don't think it's a good tool for the job. All of that comes from this place that if people don't get hooked in time, then they won't be able to start turning the screws and actually making their money on it, right? So that's a little bit of an aside, but with all of these subsidies, they can subsidize the use of their product. They can lobby to get the rules changed. So if, like the crypto industry, your business model is entirely predicated on avoiding the securities laws, well, now you can lobby to get the securities laws changed so that you never have to comply with them. It's also, we're seeing it play out with Gen AI too. If you actually enforced the copyright laws, Andreessen Horowitz wrote a letter where they said, our generative AI businesses won't be viable if you make us comply with the copyright laws in terms of the material we train our models on, right? So,
and that's by the way, and I'm sorry to jump in, but
yeah.
Isn't that exactly what you show in the book was said by Coinbase to their regulators, that if we actually have to comply with the law, we can't do business? So then so shouldn't then there not be that business then?
I mean, that is my, silly little me who's not a techno-solutionist says, well, then maybe you shouldn't have a business. But Silicon Valley says, but you love innovation, don't you? And also, we're going to give you a lot of money, policymakers. And plus, you don't want to be against innovation, do you? Because we all love innovation. And they they get the legal treatment that they want that way. Anyway, so what we have now is this fairly bloated venture capital industry, ton of herd behavior, right? They all just follow the crowd. Silicon Valley is supposed to be this iconoclastic place. Like, it's just conformist as hell. And that's part of the reason why I think people should go and watch that HBO show, Silicon Valley, is to just sort of see that illustrated. Um, and conformist people, they only lend to people, or sorry, not lend, they only fund people in their in-group. So to our point about who are you buying when you're buying Silicon Valley, you are buying the frankly privileged, Harvard, Stanford men, almost predominantly men's ideas about what the world should look like, because they're the ones that get funded. And then, they fund all kinds of crazy things. They don't do
Except,
diligence. What?
and again, I'm sorry to interrupt, but you very importantly point out one big exception to that rule of who gets invited to the club. So if you do choke a black man to death on a train station platform, you might get in. You
Yeah,
might.
that's the Daniel Penny path to being employed by Andreessen Horowitz. I just leave that in the book and say, make of that what you will.
So Harvard, Stanford, or murder a black man on a platform, and one of those three seems to be the likely path. But I'm sorry to have cut you off again. Yeah, yeah.
No, I'm glad you did. I find that so horrifying.
Sheesh.
Um,
Yeah.
so we've got a situation where they're herding into things, and the consequences of finding a bad thing, that they don't care, right? Because they've got money to burn, and the expectation is that most of their investments will fail. That's how these funds are structured. Um, and the narrative around that is it's a good thing because it means they're looking for the outliers, the things that other people wouldn't fund. But the truth is they fund the same things that everybody funds, and they don't do diligence on them because they're expecting them to fail most of the time anyway. And then the ones that they do want to succeed, they just buy them a place in the world. It's not about there being good technology. They just subsidize the hell out of them and then lobby for legal changes to enshrine them into our world. And never any diligence, never any thought for consequences for who's going to be harmed by this.
So I want to again invite you to come back to that point about Mark Cuban, but I want to do it by bringing up something else you raised in the book. These two percentages that have just kind of been ringing in my head since the last day or so since finishing your book. But 7% and 44%.
I know where you're going with this. Yeah.
Yeah. So I'll just leave it there and let you
Yeah.
run with that. Yeah.
Yeah. So I'll start with the Mark Cuban. So, Mark Cuban's whole shtick after the election was that if Kamala Harris and Joe Biden had been nicer to the crypto bros, that they would have won the election. And you know what? There may be some truth to that, but it's not because the American people care about crypto, right? So the Federal Reserve's survey on household finances from 2024 found that only 7% of Americans had any crypto that year, even de minimis amounts, right? So this is not something that huge, and this sort of boggles the mind given the outsized sort of place that crypto plays in our narrative and whatever. Once you realize that almost nobody has this stuff. And so that's the 7%. The 44%, that was the percentage of corporate expenditures on the 2024 election cycle, as reported by, I think it was ProPublica, or maybe it was I think it was ProPublica. Might have been the Revolving Door Project. Anyway, it was 44% of all corporate expenditures at that point in the 2024 election cycle. So nearly half of all corporate money spent on the 2024 elections comes from the crypto industry. And they bought a whole lot of ads with that, a whole lot of political ads. And did those ads mention crypto? No, they did not. As far as I'm aware, not a single one of their crypto money purchased ads mentioned crypto, because everybody knew that this was not a particularly salient issue for the American people. And so when I hear Mark Cuban say, well, you should have just been nicer to the crypto industry and you would have won, what that basically to me reads as, you need to roll over every time rich tech industry wants to do something, because otherwise we're going to make life not so nice for you. And to me, that's extortion. And I want to know where that ends, right? Is there anything that we're allowed to stand up to Silicon Valley on, or do we just have to roll over on all of it? So, we've got Elon Musk's AI, belching out, he's built these data centers in Memphis, in a predominantly Black area of Memphis, that are just causing all kinds of health issues, and it's questionable whether he had any of the necessary permits. Do we just roll over for that? Peter Thiel, who people aren't as familiar with, but is in many ways the mastermind behind so many of these Silicon Valley playbooks, he wants to build his own nuclear plant in Kentucky. Are we supposed to just let him have a private nuclear plant in Kentucky? Do we have to roll over for that, Mark Cuban? Right? Like, do we have, what, he's also posting about how we need to give more tax breaks to billionaires to incentivize them to pay more people. I'm like, okay, well, are they not incentivized enough already? Where does that stop, Mark Cuban? And I'm using Mark Cuban as a stand-in really here for this whole abundance agenda, which drives me crazy, which is this, there are aspects of this that I don't hate. I mean, so it's a part of the abundance sort of came from the desire to build more housing, which I am absolutely in favor of. But it morphed into this whole thing about, let's get rid of all the regulations that stop us from building, right? And it has morphed into this, just like the Silicon Valley people are our betters, and they will do good innovation that will trickle down benefits for everybody. So let's just roll over for them and just take it. And to come back to the points that I've already made, like, that is a very scary society from my perspective, and I would think from many people's perspective.
Yeah, and I want to emphasize quickly just a point you made earlier that always gets left out of these conversations that you really highlight, and I want to encourage people again to read your book, because not only are you offering it for free and it's easily accessible, the link is in the show description, but that you do a lot in a relatively, I don't know how many pages it would come out to in total because of the way I was just PDFing it at a
It's
time.
about 400, I think.
Is it
Like,
really? Oh.
yeah.
Well, then, salute, because it reads much faster than that. And admittedly, I listened to a good bit of it, but it flows very nicely. So, and then
It's supposed to be a fast read, and
yeah.
I mean, and it's also, that's me playing around on my desktop. How many pages? I don't know how many pages it would actually come out to.
Whatever it is, it's easily digestible, and you say a lot in it, including more about this point I'm trying to get to eventually here, about the I think I just lost it. But something about the attitudes of the people involved, that they, oh, that's the point, that that what gets left out of this discussion is the collective input and contribution to all of the genius that gets credited and accumulated, especially in terms of wealth, into the hands of this handful of people, but all of whom used the existence of a society and all that is contributed from everyone to get these lofty positions, to take advantage of a certain, allegedly free market, whatever, all of that stuff. But then they want to use all of that to destroy everything, including the universities that they all graduated from. They don't even, and a lot of what you talk about, what Peter Thiel's time at Stanford, a lot of his issues were directed at, and given his background, which I've read more about separately. I mean, he's a very disturbing figure, but his, everything was just targeting, despite himself being gay, there's no concern for the rest of the LGBTQ experience. There's no or community. He does. I don't feel like he sees himself as part of that community,
Mhm.
um, or any community that doesn't involve really just still rich white men. I mean, it's like, but he's very everything was targeted at diversity, at gender, at race, at any.
Multiculturalism was how he described it back in the day when he was railing against it.
Yeah. So I just wanted to quickly emphasize that point there, and then here we have again Mark Cuban doing a version of the same thing, which is where at one point, um, so the one little quibble that I have I'm not wanting to argue is just like uh, 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 you're not making an anti-capitalist argument. And at one point, you're saying that there's a capitalism with uh,
Restraints.
restraints that would work. But one of the notes that I made is that when you talk about how we end up subsidizing the subsidies that they get and then use to privatize everything else, I was saying that that's the argument against and why I'm ultimately against capitalism. That at the end of the day, they do use the public
Mhm.
contribution to privatize all of the accumulated wealth and benefits, and then use that to further
Yeah.
wither away. But my point is, the book, you do a great job in showing what they're doing, and that this is what is undergirding all of this. Let me just time check with you how much, because I know.
I'm good for a little while.
Okay, all right. Because I did want to ask. So I did want to ask you if you could talk to us a little bit, to the extent you haven't already, about this term you use in shitification. What is in shitification?
Well, first of all, it's just a straight up awesome word that I cannot take credit for. It's not my word, it's Cory Doctorow's word.
That's right, right.
And actually, Cory Doctorow's Enshittification book, he coined the word a couple of years ago. But the book is coming out, I believe, in October this year.
Mm,
So that's another one to look out for. Um, so he's he's coined this word, and I and many others use it now casually to just describe something that's getting worse over time, but or getting worse because people keep messing with it. But he really has a more specific um, thing in mind, and it actually ties into your critique of capitalism that you just spoke about. And so maybe I'll just sort of start there, which is, I think I absolutely agree with you that the flywheel of capitalism, like once too much money and power gets entrenched, then the restraints are all broken down. So I think my view is that the restraints have to be strong from the beginning, because once that flywheel gets going, I'm with you that there's sort of no stopping it. And the sort of the goal is, I guess, yeah, just to go back to what I said earlier, we've got all this, this narrative about how Silicon Valley exists to make the world a better place, but Silicon Valley exists to make money. And if you take restraints away, and particularly if you take antitrust away and organized labor away, those constraints, then there's really nothing to stop Silicon Valley from making their product worse and yet more profitable. So, you start with, take something like, um, Google, or, original Facebook, which, I was early adopters of both of those things, and they were a delight to use. Google's search was great. That's why people started calling it Googling. Facebook this was before they started messing with the feed algorithmically. It just showed me posts from my friends around the world and who was having babies and getting engaged, and I loved it, right? But once that's sort of phase one, which is getting the user base by providing a product that users like. But in the absence of real antitrust law constraints, these kinds of platforms develop what we call network externalities, and you want to be there because that's where everybody else is, and so you kind of become locked in to a particular platform. And once you're locked in, if you have yeah, as I said, no antitrust constraints or anything like that, then it sort of makes a certain kind of sense that the platforms then will make your user experience worse in order to make more money. And so the way they do that is they start optimizing for the business customers, the people who actually pay, the advertisers typically, right? And then it can go sort of steps further after that. If the business customers get locked in, you can start messing with them because they have nowhere else to go. So for example, Amazon started making life harder for some sellers or others, depending on how much you paid. Or Meta started making life harder for people, for media outlets posting on their platforms. So it's this just, if employees are no longer in a position to push back, and I keep coming back to AI, but I mean, I think part of the enthusiasm for the narrative that AI can replace workers in Silicon Valley has come from the sort of 2020, 2021 period where we started to see tech workers pushing back against their employees, engaging, as part of, part of it was engaging in military or surveillance style technology. Part of it was part of the Black Lives Matter moment in 1920. Why do I keep saying 1920? I feel like maybe because that's where I think we're going back to.
But I was going to say like the Gilded Age and all
Yeah.
the
Anyway,
yeah.
2020. So I think the elite in Silicon Valley were horrified that their employees were exerting some power, were forming unions and things like that. So I think that's been part of the reason for the push so hard for AIs. They want a way to not have to deal with those troublesome employees anymore. So with that gone, with no real threat of competition, with less and less threat of regulation, then things can just get enshittified worse and worse.
Thank you. So before I get to the chat, I do want to and pull up a couple of questions. And folks, if you do have any, this would be the time to recycle them back to the top, please. So you do end the book by one of the suggestions you offer is that we increase our ridicule of these folks, and you make a good case for why they should be ridiculed, and as you say, because they are ridiculous. And this is why I think, again, to sort of again make this perform this contradiction of oh wow, how did this, what are we doing here? Let me fix this. I do want to show you and encourage you and others to look at this film that Rotten Tomato, like it's not like it's not a good movie. I'm not saying it's a good movie, and the Rotten Tomatoes crowd is
Piling on.
piling on. But I think it's because they haven't read your book and they don't get what the writers of this film are trying to do. And I think the writers of this film, if they weren't somehow in advance reading what you hadn't yet fully written, at least written here, they've been following along with your argument or something similar. I just can't because this film is ridiculous. And the way they depict these billionaires, and then even in the picture there, I don't know if folks could even see it. It's a scene where they're out in the snow and they're competing with each other, but they're writing on their chests their net worths, and it's all in so it's hundreds of billions of dollars versus less billions, and then the poorest one there is only worth 600 million, and he's endeavoring to become a billionaire by the end of the film. But during the course of the whole thing, we're being it's kind of like Silicon Valley, the series. We're being invited to consider what these people might be like when they're off record and with they're together. They are constantly trying to manipulate the international political world and the economies of the world. They're in wild competition with each other. They're insecure. They're unimpressive. They're not impressive people. They're not people that you would think as a child, oh, that's who I'm going to grow up to be. It's like, no, it's so. And then lastly, you even used the word. I had to look it up after I watched this film because this is why I'm convinced that they're on the same page, the writers, because I'm not familiar with the term de minimis, which becomes almost like a cartoonish phrase in the film. And for those who are not familiar with the Latin as I wasn't, it means, as I just looked up again, something so small that it's insignificant and not worthy of consideration. And they're talking about everything and every group of people and every and they just keep saying to each other, de minimis, de minimis. It's de minimis. Those people are de minimis. That idea, that country is de minimis. And I mean, all right. So my last question for you on this is to just say a word or two about ridicule, the importance of ridicule as you argue, and why we should engage it as even as these people are trying to lead us off of yet another cliff.
Yeah.
Why
So,
should we be ridiculing them?
well, that's why. You just answered your own question. But no, it's funny. Like, yeah, the de minimis thing. I haven't seen the movie yet, so I didn't know that they were using that. One of the things that I've heard a lot of people saying right now in that set is NPC, non-player characters that they're
I learned that
using.
from my kids. Yeah,
Yeah, but they're
yeah,
using that to sort of, again, de minimis. Like, these aren't people who count. Um, yeah, no, it's, so you said you think, they must have been reading my chapter to make that movie. I'm not the only one talking about this.
right.
So, there's plenty of people who've been studying this longer and harder than I have. And I'm very indebted to them in terms of my writing on this stuff. Jacob Silverman, for example, has a whole book on this called Gilded Rage, that's about to come out in the next couple of months or so. But I think you summed it up brilliantly. Like, they're not that impressive deep down. I think they know it. So it all becomes a pissing contest to who has the most money, because they're trying to, like, fill a hole. They are all conformist. I mean, one of the scariest things I read was a Semaphore article, which I actually reference a couple of times in the book, about the group chats that they have. So, where they get together and they sort of self-radicalize on these group chats about how much better they are than everybody else and how undeserving all these de minimis or NPC people are. Um, I saw someone I just saw out of the corner of my eye in the chat, someone asked if I had a hate list. I mean, so
No, no, no. I'll explain that in a second. That's not what that meant, but
oh, okay,
it
because
may
if,
you may actually catch the meaning, but that it has a specific meaning. But
oh, okay.
I'll come back.
Well, let me just say the way I read that, which not may not be how it actually is intended, is that I do, out of these guys, have my number one villain, and my number one villain is Mark Andreessen of Andreessen Horowitz. I mean, actually, Peter Thiel is probably worse, but in terms of what I'm writing about, like, Mark Andreessen is just it didn't start out that way, but it just became the focal point of every time I was worried about something, it turned out that Mark Andreessen was there, which is also, I think, true about Peter Thiel as well. Um, but he is the epicenter of all these group chats, apparently, at Semaphore. And it's actually really interesting. Apparently, a bunch of right-wing operatives realized that if they could get into these group chats, it would be a really great place with Mark Andreessen. It would be a really great place to radicalize Silicon Valley to more right-wing causes. And it was very intentional. So I have now gone down a rabbit hole, and I can't even remember what the question was.
No,
Sorry.
no, it's all. No, I was just asking you to talk about why we should be ridiculing them. That was it.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
So, I said, I mean, the book is is a call to skepticism of everything that Silicon Valley tells you, right? Start with the assumption that they are trying to sell you something and treat it like a promise in the lead up to an election, give it that much credibility, and just push back. That's what I want. I think that's where we start being able to fix some of this, is with a narrative shift. The challenge with a narrative shift is that there are some very influential, well, first of all, these people are rich and have huge megaphones as a result, and that gives them a lot of ability to sort of co-opt the narrative. Then places that you would think would be a good place to push back on that narrative, like the media or universities, have also been weaponized by Silicon Valley, which is not to say that there aren't fantastic independent researchers and journalists pushing back, but there is also a lot of money funding the people who are going to whitewash or support or pump the narrative that Silicon Valley wants. And so if we want to change the narrative, one of the best ways, I think, is to do what the less powerful have always done to challenge the more powerful, and that is to laugh at them. And it's not a hard thing to do in this instance, given how patently ridiculous these people are. And if you start to just realize, like, oh yeah, these people are pretty dumb, silly, nasty, and mean, they do not seem like the kind of person that I would like to entrust the operations of solving our most important problems to, then I think that's a great start. Because I just think Silicon Valley has benefited enormously from its narrative of being like this cradle of innovation and this, just everything that's good about America, and it's not.
And you've put some action behind, and actually have me again rethinking my whole relationship to this, even though I really should know better given how long I've been paying attention to this. But if I remember, you've left Twitter or X and Facebook as well. I think you said you don't engage any of these because of, as you argue, what not only the people, the politics, but what is being argued is their value is
Yeah, and I don't want to
disturbing. Yeah.
get too purity testy about this,
Hmm,
because
hmm.
everybody's lives are different. I mean, I left Facebook not for any sort of political or value judgments. It just sucked. Like, the enshittification got to the point where I couldn't see the pictures of my friends' babies because I was being fed political content that I was trying to escape from, right?
Yeah.
So I quit that. That's why I stopped using Facebook. Um, I think Twitter, it was sort of a twofer. It also got worse. I mean, every time I tried to, just half your replies were bots and selling you, because I used to post about crypto negatively, some bot triggered that I was like crypto interested, and I would just get absolutely
Oh
spammed
yeah.
by so much crypto stuff. And so it sort of became unusable. And then on top of that, you sort of understood what Elon Musk was trying to do with it. So that was an added incentive for me to get out of there. But it's, I guess it shows that enshittification has its limits. Like, at a certain point, if it's not critical infrastructure, people will eventually leave, which just again shows how not particularly bright some of these people are who are running these companies.
Yeah. So one of the questions that I did see you have an answer to in your book, and or it's really more of a comment. I think I missed the initial question, but Leah Boggs and well, Yipper and Kim, and they're talking about a data center here in Maryland being imposed through the city, the county council, I think in PG County, Prince George's County. Um, and you talk a little bit about why that might be, at least. Uh, in I think chapter 8, if you want to say a word or two. I think we've already touched on it, but why
Yeah.
we might be seeing data centers or attempts to spread I don't know, something associated with these technologies into communities.
Yeah, I mean, so there is unfortunately a bit of an unholy alliance between the fossil fuel industry and Silicon Valley that has cropped up. You see it in Bitcoin mining in particular. So if you're not familiar with, it's not actually mining, but how sort of Bitcoin transactions are validated, it requires people running supercomputers trying to guess a random number, and it's enormously wasteful of electricity. Like, you know, like Bitcoin mining uses as much electricity as the entire country of the Netherlands, for example, like that level. And there have been, you know, and so that's bad for the whole globe. But if you live near one of these sort of mining, it's like a warehouse filled with buzzing computers. It's incredibly noisy. There's been noise pollution. It drives up electricity prices for the surrounding communities. There's been a lot of pushback. And so what's happened is there's this group called the Satoshi Action Fund, which is, from what I can tell, sort of bankrolled by some fossil fuel interests, and they have been shopping legislation called right to mine legislation to different states, and at least 4 have passed it already, which basically says, you know, local ordinances, et cetera, can't get in the way of Bitcoin mining operations. And we're seeing a similar thing with the data centers that are needed for AI, right? They are skirting permitting thing requirements, and you know, there's just this, and this isn't just in the United States. I mean, this is global. It's happening all over the EU as well. Just the push to build these data centers, and we're told we need more because it's progress. And it's not just for AI. They use them for cloud computing as well. But AI is just so hungry for energy that it just the and data that it's becoming a real problem. And yeah, that again, it's problematic for the surrounding communities. Typically, electricity prices go up depending on how you're creating electricity. As I mentioned in Memphis with Elon Musk's data centers, you know, they can have immediate pollution impacts on the local community. And then, of course, there's the broader issue of global warming. So we're just in this place, you know, where the techno-solutionism and the narrative is such that everything must yield to AI progress, everything. And no one ever talks about the limitations of AI. It's just, this is the future, and it's, you know, inevitable, and we can't stop it, and we have to beat China, and, you know, blah, 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 blah. I'm like, beat China at what? Polluting our country and putting people out of work. Like, I mean, anyway, so that is my very long-winded answer to, this is happening everywhere. In the current environment we're in, it's very hard for local communities to push back against these types of data centers.
And then, you know, I was also thinking of, and I don't know the if there's, to what extent there's a direct one-to-one connection, but you do mention our exciting new senator Angela also Brooks, who was put on some crypto commission or something like that. Got
Oh no,
some.
so her first action in Congress, straight
Yeah,
out of the gate, was to co-sponsor crypto legislation
that's
that the
right.
crypto industry wanted. I was not pleased. She's my senator too. And I was not pleased that that was her very first action. Um, yeah, I,
Yeah. So, yeah. Anyway, that's that. Yeah, I forgot the detail, but that's right. That's right. Thank you for that. Yeah, I just thought this was funny. Every time I hear someone say non-fungible, I keep thinking they're trying to their hardest not to curse.
I like that too.
That's a good one.
Try it with my kids.
Yeah, 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 yeah.
What the fungible?
What the fungible are you doing over there? So yeah, this is I don't know. Ode to John Trudell, ideas on how to monkey wrench all this AI garbage. You've
Yeah,
talked a little bit about that. You know, ridicule, change the narrative. But
yeah. I mean, so I mean, you can be an AI refuser to the extent your boss doesn't make you use it. Some bosses are. But if you are not in that position, you can be an AI refuser. I am one. I used it once and once only, and that was actually in this book I had it summarize all the fintech hype from the internet for me because I just couldn't bear to write a pro fintech section for the book. So that was my one and done on ChatGPT. But yes, so you can refuse to use it individually. That's only going to go so far. This is a collective action problem. I think, could raise, one of the things I say in the book is you can laugh at it, but you can also just talk to people about it. Like when I'm just chatting with my friends, they're shocked to hear how much water AI data centers use, right? And they're shocked. Most people don't know that ChatGPT was trained on data sets that were curated by people in Africa being paid $2 an hour and being exposed to some really horrible things in that process, and they're now traumatized, right? People think that AI is just machines. No, human labor was used, just not well paid human labor, to construct the data sets. Human labor is now being used again on the back end to sort of improve the answers because the tech itself can't do it. That's all these things. If I think people just don't hear it because that's not the preferred narrative. So that's part of the reason why I wrote the book.
Actually, could you say another word about when you say these workers are being used to improve the data sets? What is and being traumatized? What is the work that they're doing entail? Like, what does that look like? Because I don't know that that's.
Yeah, so I mean, it's sort of,
Yeah.
it's similar to the content moderation you sometimes hear about in. So for content moderation, you have these poor people sitting in warehouses, like making sure people aren't posting beheading videos, and they've got to get that out.
So they
Depending
would, of
on,
course, have to see it first to then know to take it right. Yeah.
yeah, and so if you're building an image AI, like you've got to get all the snuff porn out of the data set, right? Because they're just scouring from the internet, right? So who weeds
Oh
that
wow.
out? It's humans. um that's sort of the traumatic labor that I'm talking about in all of this. um
Right, because the experience that we're having online that we think is just it actually was reminded me of years ago when I don't know where I learned this, but when they talked about when you get a new iPhone and you have to peel off that when you open it and have to peel off that last little bit of screen protecting whatever that they put on there, that human hands put that there with the idea, but the idea is that by the time we receive it in the packaging, we won't recognize the human involvement. We'll think this is all by machines.
yeah,
Not that we want, not that we should want people replaced by machines in every instance, but the idea is that all of this is masking what is actually the process involved. So when we go online and we're having our experiences, sometimes using AI directly or whatever, sometimes not, we don't recognize how much of that is actually curated by human involved labor to prepare the experience we're going to have to appear in such a way that they're not involved and that
yeah,
this was just magical.
exactly. And so people just, they get that magical narrative and they don't interrogate it. So you can talk about the environmental cost, you can talk about the human labor and how traumatic it can be and how underpaid it is. You can also just talk about how there's this assumption that technology will always just get better, that it's linear. And you can talk about how it's actually, the Gen AI's hit a wall with hallucinations, and it's unlikely to get much better than it is now. You can talk about the fact, this is one that even for your cold hard capitalist friends, a lot of people don't realize how subsidized the use of these tools are, and that the businesses are losing money basically on every single time you use it, and that isn't going to change. Sorry, that isn't going to stay the same forever. Someday it will change. So you can ask them, like, how much would you be willing to pay for a mistake riddled first draft? Because they're going to start charging through the nose someday. Do you want to build a business model around expecting free usage when in fact it's going to be a lot more expensive? You can talk about the cognitive learning loss, that people just, the more they rely on this stuff, they get dumber. And if you want to, really get into the deep dark stuff on this, going back to what we were talking about before, like these people, the Silicon Valley elite, who want us to, be their followers, their sheeple to their tech CEO dictator models, the dumber we are and the less capable of critical thinking we are, the easier that is to bring about. So there's many ways you can talk to people about AI's limitations. You can also laugh at it because it does a lot of really stupid stuff. But one thing that I'm watching, which I'm very interested in, is just like people, as I said, aren't as hooked on it as they want them to be in this stage of the process. And there's a lot of suggestions that we have reached the top of the AI bubble and we don't necessarily have the adoption necessary. So, just as a matter of sort of a financial bubble, it's interesting to watch because once the financial bubble around it pops, and I don't think it's sustainable in its current form, then that will impact the narrative as well.
Right on. Um, One other question, just one final one that I'm gonna just put together from a couple of others is going back to that point that was we referenced passingly earlier about Coinbase and its legal, from its perspective, or it should be a precarious position.
It's not anymore.
Well, right. Should, that's what I was going to say. It should have been or should be. Why? A lot of the argument, as it was initially put to me, was that, and promoted popularly, was that the cryptocurrency world was going to decentralize and open up the economy and get us away from banks. And you talk a little bit about the claims around that it's going to get the unbanked banked, and that this is somehow itself going to be a solution to poverty and inequality, which I've always been like, if, if you don't have any money, having a bank account isn't going to make you rich. But that's another, but what could you say a little bit about specifically what is Coinbase? Because again, what ended up becoming clear to me is that at the end of the day, all these claims are false because we do end up with a situation where a handful of entities are playing a very central role in all of this exchange and all of this. And uh uh but I didn't quite catch, and I don't know enough of the details about that the legal concerns that they were facing and now how they've avoided it. But what is Coinbase as this exchange doing that it shouldn't be able to do, but
Mm.
is, while at the same time claiming to replace what others are said to be doing by them? Anyway, yeah.
Yeah.
So what is Coinbase, and what do these exchanges do, and how do they?
Okay. So Coinbase is a crypto exchange. The thing about crypto exchanges is that they have under one roof things that if they were securities exchanges wouldn't be allowed to be under the same roof. So for example, if you had Schwab as your broker and you wanted to trade something on the New York Stock Exchange, the same company can't own Schwab and the New York Stock Exchange. And the reason for that, I think, is sort of reasonably intuitive, which is that if, Schwab is in a position to process orders for their customers, they could also trade against their customers, and help themselves that way. But they could prioritize some order transactions over others according to the highest bidder. So it's such a ripe opportunity for all kinds of conflicts of interest that the solution has always been that they can't be under the same roof, that it's structural separation. Crypto exchanges do both. And Coinbase has been quite clear in a submission to the SEC that if you made it disaggregate, it's not sure it could stay in business, right? And then they're not the only conflicts of interest that Coinbase has. Coinbase also and I should say, Coinbase is extremely litigious, so I am not saying it does any of these things, just that the opportunity presents itself.
And I agree. I co-sign that caveat, or that um, fine print, verbal fine print.
Um, so Coinbase is also a big validator on the Ethereum blockchain. So they are one of the top people who decides the order in which transactions get processed on the blockchain. So they have that power as well. They are also highly affiliated with the USDC Circle stablecoin. So they have significant economic interest in what happens with Circle as well. And so they are in a position to stop trades. If people were trying to bail out of Circle, they could stop trades. And they actually did do that briefly in 2023 when there was a run on the USDC stablecoin during the Silicon Valley Bank failure. Coinbase also has an affiliated venture capital fund. So basically, they have a fund that launches new crypto projects, which gives volume of projects for Coinbase to trade. But again, like the whole reason the FTX exchange failed was because of conflicts of interest between an exchange and an affiliated fund. But none of the crypto laws we're talking about are talking about stopping that kind of arrangement, right? Because they're written by the crypto industry for the crypto industry, not to actually solve the risks that they pose. And so that's actually a good segue into the other thing that, Coinbase couldn't do if the securities laws on the books were applied as they should be, is that if those securities and I should say, the SEC had sued Coinbase during the Biden administration, saying that it was operating as an unregistered securities exchange, which would force it to disaggregate its businesses, as I mentioned earlier. The only way to stop that would be to not list any securities on the Coinbase exchange. Coinbase argued that none of the things that they were listing were securities, which comes back to the conversation we were having before about, is it a cryptocurrency or a token or whatever? But the securities laws make it harder to launch projects out of thin air. And if that was the case, there would be nothing to trade on Coinbase, which would also hurt, not nothing, but almost nothing, which would also hurt its bottom line. So that's why getting the laws changed has always been so existentially important to Coinbase's business model, because as I said, blockchains suck and they were never going to succeed just on the basis of blockchain technology.
So, but that's what I think is so wild because, and again, definitely not wanting to, this is for entertainment purposes only, as Pancho said, but all I'm hearing, as you point out, this is something that could be happening. You're not saying that they are doing it, but the fact that it's something that could be happening, everything you just listed sounds horrible. And yet they're also saying, if we're not allowed to do this, we can't survive.
And
How are they framed? I'm actually fascinated to want to go read their own argument. Like, how are they framing that argument to not be also admitting that this is not sustainable?
Because of innovation,
Oh,
Jared, because we don't stop innovation. And
yeah,
because innovation is how we're going to democratize finance and bank the unbanked and thus make the world a better place. And who would want to get in the way of that, especially when Coinbase has a massive money gun pointed at you?
and that's why you talk about this other work about the Luddites and because then we're just holding up. And as I mentioned earlier, I'm glad in our first discussion, I'm glad you properly redefine who the Luddites were. But in the popular parlance and usage, that's who we're always dismissed as because we're trying to stop innovation. And yet, and then also I hear that so ultimately we're being invited to greater degrees of centralization by people who are promising a decentralized, free process. So that's
it's actually, yeah, I'm working on a chapter for an antitrust handbook right now about how how strong the economic concentrations are in all degrees of crypto, far more than you would see in traditional and finance often.
Yeah, that's what looked like I was looking at when I was looking at what I was looking at. So I'll be looking forward to look at what you finish when that you said it's a book,
No,
a collection.
it's a chapter for a book. Yeah.
That whenever that book comes out, I'll look for that as well. Listen, Professor Allen, thank you very much again for both doing this work and for these discussions. I really appreciate you being accessible in this way, and the work is great. Anything that you would want to say that I didn't invite you to say or mention or talk about before we wrap up for this discussion?
Well, first, I just want to say thank you because I really appreciate these conversations as well. But maybe I'll sort of leave on the note I leave the book on, which is like that Silicon Valley likes to colonize optimism. Like like to say that they're the optimists because they're all about the future and innovation. But in fact, it's a pretty impoverished view, I think, of the future that they have. And I think the real optimism is to keep fighting for a better world, a real better world, against the people who have all the money and the power. And so I'm very much of the fighter vibe right now. And so you can fight through talking to people and through laughing at things, and that's a nice way to do it.
Hey, absolutely. I appreciate that vibe and that energy. Again, Professor Allen, thank you very much. Folks, the work is linked in the show description. The book Fintech Dystopia, link to find out and learn more about Professor Allen's work. There's a lot. I actually was looking up, and I actually started your article on sandboxes that you the sand that you reference in the book, which is also interesting and disturbing in terms of what is trying to be done to protect themselves against any forms of regulation and any testing of their technology before it's just thrown on us like that.
Well,
So
that would also impede innovation.
Yeah. Right. Just let us yeah. Anyway. So thank you very much, and I hope people will take me up on the challenge to engage your work, and I look forward to talking to you again. Thank you very much.
Thanks for having me.
Anytime. All right, listen, everybody. Please do. Thanks again to Professor Allen. The book is really fun. It's disturbing. It's scary. It's informative, but it's also a fun read and listen. And I also just want to shout out Professor Allen as part of the academic world that is doing what is needed to be done for there in our careers, but also looking to do work that is accessible and both in terms of ease of access and affordability beyond the classroom. People like my man Pancho here doing the same thing. So not everyone in these ivory towers is ivory towering in the same way. So salute to her for that as well. And there's something else I wanted to say that I'm forgetting, but so be it. So again, yeah, make sure you check the work in the show description. And I will share again if folks want to hang out a little bit for my virtual birthday party later this month. But other than that, peace, everybody. Only if you're willing to fight for it. As Fred Hampton and Professor Hilary Allen said, admittedly in slightly different forms, but fighting nonetheless. And I'll catch you next time around here at
And what do you sacrifice?
Calm, kindness, kinship, love. I've given up all chance at inner peace. I made my mind a sunless space. I share my dreams with ghosts. I wake up every day to an equation I wrote 15 years ago for which there's only one conclusion. I'm damned for what I do. My anger, my ego, my unwillingness to yield, my eagerness to fight, that set me on a path from which there's no escape. I yearn to be a savior against injustice without contemplating the cost, and by the time I look down, there's no longer any ground beneath my feet. What is my sacrifice? I'm condemned to use the tools of my enemy to defeat them. I burn my decency for someone else's future. I burn my life to make a sunrise that I know I'll never see. Now, the ego that started this fight will never have a mirror or an audience or the light of gratitude. So what do I sacrifice? Everything.
I mix what I like, what I like, what I like, what I like, what I like.